everybody, Ben Woodruff here with another falconry video. Today's video, I'm going to be talking about prairie falcons and Gyr falcons. Two species that in some ways look very similar and are also very different. Before we jump into this video, if you haven't already, if you could hit subscribe, it helps me keep this channel up and going. I very much appreciate the support. And let's just jump into both of these two species. Now, first of all, I want to give a recommendation. If you have access to all different kinds of falcon species and you want to hunt a big falcon, and that's this flight style you want to do, you want to just fly with a big falcon, and you have access to a peregrine falcon in any way, whether you have a wild take or a captive bred, get a peregrine falcon. That is 90% of the success you're going to have. You get a peregrine falcon, they are the easiest to train large falcon to have success with. They have evolved in a way that they work so well with humanity. They understand falconry and the concept of it very quickly. They're much more loyal. They're fast. They're agile. They're nimble. And they can take prey that humans find very valuable and worth eating, from grouse to ducks to pheasants, things like that. They're great. I love peregrine falcons. Peregrine falcons are kind of famous. Everybody's heard of a peregrine. They live almost everywhere in the world. And so it's easy to be like, yeah, peregrine. No, but they really are that good in falconry as well. So I bring that up first and foremost. If you're considering between a peregrine, a prairie, and a gyr, and your only thing is, I just want to have success flying a bird, haven't done many before, go get a peregrine. That is my first and foremost recommendation. However, if you want to kind of push yourself or torture yourself, maybe consider a prairie falcon or a Gyr falcon. Both of these birds are incredible, and both of these have their challenges. So I'm going to talk about these birds and kind of compare them, especially, a light form or a first-year pale Gyr falcon can look very similar to the untrained eye to a prairie falcon. But let's start off with prairie falcons. Prairie falcons live in a very specific area. They're just in the western United States and barely into western Canada and in northwestern Mexico. That's it. They're not a very wide distributed species. They're a very ancient bird. Now, originally, it was thought, just based off of their looks and their appearances, that they are a member of the Gyrfalcon family group, which is Gyr falcons, saker falcons, lanner falcons, and lagger falcons. That's the Gyrfalcons. They're a separate group that branched off early on, and they're the biggest of all falcons. And they're also considered to be the most primal or earliest form of true falcon. Oftentimes the lanner falcon specifically is considered to be that. So just based on the coloration, the assumption was, prairie falcons are a type of Gyrfalcon, and the only Gyrfalcon that's truly only lives in the New World. Because Gyr falcons we'll get into them, they range out and they can come into the United States. But genetic studies, many genetic studies have come to prove that to be not the case. It turns out prairie falcons, their most closest relative is the peregrine falcon. And molecular decomposition studies and studying the actual mitochondrial DNA has shown that it's about 3 to 5 million years ago that prairie falcons branched off from some sort of archaic early form of a peregrine falcon. Branched off and became its own thing. Now, we don't know for sure where peregrines started because they live just about everywhere in the world. But we know that prairie falcons only live here in the New World. And if you know that they are related to peregrines, and you look closely at the patterning, the striping, especially on the back, on the adults, you're like, okay, I can see it's a pale bird. I can see the family relation here. But they do not think or act or behave, and even their morphological composition is nothing like a peregrine. So peregrine falcons, enormous feet, very stiff, plasticky feathers. That's part of why peregrine falcons are so fast, because their falcons are so stiff and plasticky that there's less air resistance. On average, for their size, a peregrine falcon really does have a very short tail compared to like a prairie falcon. So everything about a peregrine falcon, peregrines for their size also have rich, huge musculature on their chest that's just meant to just hunt and just chase and pursue without ever taking a rest. Prairie falcons are not built that way. Prairie falcons live in the prairies and the deserts, and they have adapted to a harsher way of life. Now, at the end of the Ice Age, you had a lot of cold weather prairies, basically like steppe land, which is kind of cold, dry grasslands. And then as those have warmed up and become more and more arid, the prairie falcon has learned to thrive in areas where even peregrine falcons would kind of prefer not to be. So here in Utah, we have a lot of prairie falcons. And when you go out to our west deserts, many of our deserts in, well, huge parts of the western United States, especially parts of Arizona, but especially the bulk of Nevada and the bulk of Utah during the Ice Age were under enormous lakes, like Lake Bonneville covered most of the state of Utah, and Lake Lahontan that covered most of the state of Nevada. Lake Bonneville was over 1,000 feet deep of fresh water. And as that emptied out and evaporated down to where now you just have the Great Salt Lake, but you have all these salt flats and all these really extreme deserts. Now you get a lot of short grasses. You get it favors rodents, short grasses. You can have things like jackrabbits and hares, but mostly what you're favoring is smaller rodents, things like kangaroo rats and mice and voles and certain things like that. The antelope ground squirrel is another species you find in these areas. Very arid. You also have a lot of birds in these areas, but most of them are small. You still have birds migrating through because during the Ice Age, remember, these states had enormous lakes, freshwater lakes. So you'd have waterfowl and different things passing through, and they're still genetically wired. The descendants of those birds are genetically wired to pass through, and they're like, well, where am I? It's just a big old, salty dry brush type desert. Where do I go? And so anywhere you find a little rocky alcove in these areas, that used to be an island in these desert states. Very recently, like 1 million years ago, to about 10,000 years ago, they're little islands which would have drawn these birds in. So in these deserts, we have a lot of horned larks. There's a lot of other smaller birds as well, but horned larks are particularly common. And prairie falcons do really good at hunting these small, nimble prey. They also will hunt a lot of small rodents. They will hunt kangaroo rats. They will hunt antelope ground squirrels. And these are prey items that most peregrine falcons would turn their nose up to. It's just the way they are. Now, I'm going to attach a link to this video to Steve Chindgren. Steve Chindgren has an amazing channel. He's an incredible falconer and wildlife educator, but I'm going to put a link specifically to a video he made where he's just following a prairie falcon nest throughout the year. I will put a link down in there so you can see it. He's got some incredible footage well worth seeing. But some of the prairie falcon nests I've been to over the years, what I've found is that prairie falcons nest in areas that are just not very high, not high at all. They'll nest quite low to the ground. Some of the nests you can just walk right in. And that is very similar to sometimes with lanner falcons and lagger falcons and even saker falcons, where they'll, in their arid environments, sometimes even nest right on the ground. I've never heard of a prairie falcon nesting on the ground, but sometimes they get pretty darn close to that, where you can literally just walk up and poke your head in a nest right there. As a falcon, both prairie falcons and Gyr Falcons are not nest builders. So when I say the nest, I'm referring to just a rocky cave, or else they'll take over like an old raven nest that's, again, built in like a rocky cave. They like a little bit of shelter. So prairie falcons are built for extreme dry, arid conditions. Their feathers, they produce kind of a dustiness to it that's very similar to cockatoos. If you ever get a chance to work with a cockatoo, there's kind of this dustiness over them that helps keep the moisture in the body and the feathers themselves. Prairie falcons have this as well. There's kind of this powdery, gentle dust just skip over it all, and that helps them from doing that. Now, prairie falcons are more buoyant than a peregrine falcon. They're a bit broader, and their wings are not as strong. The breast muscles that flap the wings down are much smaller on a prairie falcon, but they're also much lighter, so they can be buoyant and they can chase, because again, a bird like a prairie falcon, instead of I'm going to be a peregrine falcon and chase a duck for a mile and catch it, instead it's like, no, I'm just gonna I might just go dive down on a ground squirrel, or I might just go catch a kangaroo rat and it's a piece of cake. I might just go catch a sparrow. But they do have the ability to be very athletic and capable hunters and will take out things like horned larks. Prairie falcons, they have a longer tail. They're more tan and more deserty, more khaki in their appearance to blend in with the desert environments that they like to live in. And they are still incredible falconry birds. They anything that a peregrine falcon can be trained to hunt, a prairie falcon can also be trained to hunt. Now that being said, if you have a male peregrine, if you have a female peregrine and a female prairie, there's female prairies maybe the same size, a little smaller. But then when you go down to the males, you have male peregrine. I don't know if I said that right. Female, female, male, male. So what I'm saying is, even though they're comparable in size, there's more difference between a female down to a male prairie falcon than a female to a male peregrine. So male prairies, because of that, are really fun. I mean, they can actually be downright tiny. They're really fun to stoop to the lure. Prairie falcons, the weight management needs to be very precise, and if you're off, then they have a tendency to want to go wander off and self-hunt. It'll drive you crazy. If you're just 2 grams over, it's like, what? Oh, come on, bird. What are you doing? Prairie falcons, if you have them dialed in, a lot of falconers who have flown both a lot of peregrines and a lot of prairies will say a properly dialed in female prairie will hit harder than any other falcon in a dive, taking out prey. Could be true, but that's what a lot of people say and a lot of people personally experienced. In their hunting, they can catch something in a straight dive, in a straight stoop, but they'll also do a dive where they come down and they'll hit the prey on the way back up. It's one of the things they're known for. And given the two, it's one of the options they prefer. They can be absolutely maddening to work with because oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes they're very inconsistent where they'll just, okay, I want to go, they're trained to wait on. So they're trained to circle up above you, you flush up prey, they dive down and catch it. And you do it one day, this is the right time of day, the right weight, everything. Bird goes up, everything's perfect. Dives down, catches a pigeon, catches a pheasant, does great. The next day, same weight, same time, same everything, and it kind of just goes around clipping daisy, just dinking around, doesn't want to fly. You're like, what is your deal, bird? And then the next day, it's back to doing it how it should. So prairie falcons are inconsistent in that way. Prairie falcons had a rich, positive history in the past. I don't know, since like the 70s, since the 60s. So in the United States, we had no history of falconry. And people just kind of had to come up with it. The Craighead brothers helped to pioneer a lot of falconry in the United States. And the Craighead brothers' sister, Jean Craighead George, is the author of the book My Side of the Mountain, where a boy goes off and lives off the land and trains a peregrine falcon. And that got a lot of people, including me, into the sport of falconry. So there was this kind of Eastern center. Now, people did falconry all over, but especially back east. And then that idea kind of moved further and further westward, other than isolated people. So in the West, we had prairie falcons. They didn't have them back east. And so the early falconers were not flying them. So prairie falcons kind of came late to the game. By the time falconry was really starting to pick up steam in the United States in the mid-1900s, then falconers thought, well, hey, we would like to fly a peregrine falcon. We're reading these books, and these medieval falconers, they would fly peregrine falcons. We want a peregrine. But by then, you were getting to the times where, because of the pesticide DDT, peregrine falcons were classified as endangered. So basically, it's a bug poison that farmers said, no, this is perfectly safe. They'd spray it on their crops. Little bugs would die, and they had the poison in them. Little birds would eat the little bugs. Then the peregrines would eat the little birds. And that poison, that pesticide, would go up the food chain and get denser and denser and denser in its concentration, to where the time a peregrine falcon would eat it, they wouldn't die, but it would make their eggshells thin. So the eggs wouldn't hatch, or the eggs would get crushed under the weight of the mother incubating them. So you had a few decades where this was going on and causing problems. And fortunately, falconers came together and conservationists and said, hey, let's start a program to save peregrines. So again, this is about prairies and Gyr Falcons. I'm getting a little off course as I do, but it's important to understand part of the story that people who are wanting to fly big falcons, you couldn't get a Peregrine Falcon. And it's the United States. We didn't have any other big falcon options. Not really. Other countries, there's all kinds of falcons, but not here. And so people said, well, we have Prairie Falcons. Let's fly them. So a lot of the best falconers alive today that are still practicing falconry got into it flying Prairie Falcons. And that really kind of helped the sport grow. You're doing a much more rascally, more difficult bird to train than a Peregrine Falcon. And I think it really helped shape the sport worldwide and get people to really kind of hone in on the idea of getting a bird to wait on and circle above and then dive down and attack something. It was new. It was new and really good. So Prairie Falcons were used for that purpose. Prairie Falcons, I love them, but again, my recommendation is if you have the choice between a Peregrine and a Prairie, go with the Peregrine, unless you are obsessed with the species. Now, I love lanner falcons. Lanner falcons are my favorite species of falcon. They're not the best falconry bird, but I love them. I love them for what they look like, for what they are. I love them for their history and their interaction in ancient Egypt. I love them. I will always take every opportunity I have to work with a lanner falcon just because I love the species. Now, they're not as easy as a peregrine, but hey, great. I feel the same way. If you have that kind of attitude towards a prairie falcon, if you think, look, here's this really specific bird that's only in the New World and only in this one small little area, it's a super cool species, it's a desert specialist, then go fly one and have fun with it. Just understand the bird will test you, and you're going to learn and grow as a falconer flying a prairie falcon in ways that you never would flying a peregrine. And some days it's going to kind of stress you out, but it's well worth the trade-off. So prairie falcons, really cool birds, and again, about a peregrine-sized bird, and I think I've had a lot of fun flying prairie falcons over the years. The next bird is the biggest falcon on the planet, and that is the Gyr Falcon. Gyr Falcons are circumpolar, so they live in the northern part of the northern hemisphere, and it will range south in the winter. We get them in Utah occasionally. I've seen, 3 or 4 times in my life, I've seen wild Gyr Falcons in Utah. It's pretty exciting to see that. You're like, there's a Gyr Falcon, wow. Pretty rare, but they do come this far down south. And from Canada, we also see them out on the Great Plains occasionally, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare to see a Gyr Falcon. Normally, if anybody's flying a Gyr Falcon almost anywhere in the world, it's a captive bred bird. And Gyr Falcons, my opinion, is flying a female Gyr Falcon from a pitch, from waiting on, having dived down something. To me, that is the grandest falconry. I've flown eagles, and I love flying eagles, and eagles are more epic and spectacular to watch. But for me, a Gyr Falcon, most people don't fly them. They're hard to get, and they're hard to train, and they're hard to dial in their weight, and it's the biggest falcon in the world, and some of them are pure white, some of them are pure black, or any shade of gray in between, so they're very striking in their coloration. But to get to work, to do the work, to build the relationship, build the trust, and dial your bird in to the point that you can fly them and have them dive and hunt, to me, that is kind of the highest order of falconry. Everybody's going to have their opinion on that. I just have more respect for that. If you're like, hey, I train a golden eagle, cool. That takes a lot of work, and it's a big bird, but it's nowhere near as difficult as training a Gyr Falcon. So for me, to all you others out there who have flown Gyr Falcons, I salute you, my hat's off to you. And again, I wish it was a form of falconry that more of us did, because it takes a lot. Gyr Falcons are enormous. They're huge birds. All the ones I've flown have been enormous, and yet I am told by my friends in Europe and in the Middle East that the ones we have, the few we have in breeding programs here, the laws are so strict over here that we have, through selective breeding, we have some of the smallest Gyr Falcons on the planet in our captive breeding programs. The ones you see in the Middle East and some of the ones in Europe are just absolutely insanely large. They're meant to hunt birds, but you can hunt other things with them. Some people use them to hunt things like rabbits and hares. In the Middle East, they are trained to hunt habara, or the bustard, which is a bird roughly the size of a kind of a medium-sized turkey. They'll be used to hunt these. I use them to hunt ducks and pheasants, they are very good at hunting sage grouse, but most of the people who are really good at hunting sage grouse and do it consistently say it's better to do a Gyr Peregrine hybrid because you get more loyalty. They're less prone to wander. Gyrfalcons like to wander. They like to self-hunt. They'll wait on it, they'll get bored with you, and they'll just kind of, they'll go wander around and self-hunt. And that can be very frustrating. It's also frustrating that they are so fast, arguably the fastest animal on Earth in level travel. There's faster animals in a dive, but in level travel, they would just chase after something forever. And they could catch it, but they don't. So in other words, if they do a dive at something like a sage grouse and they're like, all right, I missed you, I'm going to start chasing, and they're chasing. And eventually what happens is, they could just flap a little faster and catch up, but they just wait until the bird tuckers out, and then just dive down and catch it. It's wild. It's like, why do that? Why expend that kind of energy? But it's what Gyrfalcons do. It's the way they're wired. They're going to do what they're going to do. Gyrfalcons are so closely related to Saker falcons that some people consider them to be the same species. Genes show they are separate, but where Gyrfalcons and Saker falcons cross in the Alti mountain range, they'll interbreed. And those hybrids will hybridize and so you have kind of a new species forming in that border area. That's how closely related they are. And they're just Gyrfalcons they're so cool. They're so big. Their feet, for their size, their toes are kind of short. They have big feet, but they don't have peregrine feet, because the longer your toes are, the further out it is away from your heart, from your pulmonary system, and you're more likely to get frostbite where they live. And so they have shorter toes compared to. And so in other words, if you scaled a peregrine up to the size of a Gyrfalcon, the Gyrfalcon will have tiny feet by comparison. Those toes also, some of them grow feathers in, around, and between the toes. I've had 2 Gyrfalcons like that, and usually through wear and tear, those feathers kind of get rubbed off. But this is a selective pressure because in the wild, they're in such cold environments. Think about snowy owls. Snowy owls, their entire toes are completely covered with feathers because they'll stand barefoot on the snow. Well, that same environments where Gyrfalcons live, and having a little extra feathering on your toes, that's going to help keep you warmer. So it seems like Gyrfalcons are moving towards that. Or maybe they're moving away from it. Maybe they used to have that during the Ice Age, and now that things are warmer 10,000 years later, they're in the process of selectively losing those. Don't know for sure, but some Gyrfalcons most definitely do have those. Gyrfalcons, one of the things... Prairie Falcons are a little bit like this too, but Gyrfalcons, this drives me nuts. Sometimes when you're training a Gyrfalcon, especially a young bird that's doing great in every other way, sometimes if they get freaked out, they just get in this panic, this fight or flight mode, and they just keep jumping, and it won't shut off. And the best thing to do with a Gyrfalcon in that circumstance is you got to get them wet. Excuse me. Got to get them wet. Spray under their wings, spray under their legs, do a little spritz on their face, and they're like, oh, right. And it resets their brain. It seems really obnoxious, but it actually works really well, and it's incredibly helpful when working with Gyrfalcons. They have enormous tails. They have enormous primary feathers, and the musculature is huge as well. It's different. On a peregrine falcon, the keel bone is shorter comparatively this way, and so the muscles are more for a downbeat. Where on a Gyrfalcon, the muscles they're not as big this direction, but they're bigger this direction. They're longer, so it can do longer, broad sweeps of their flap because this is a long-distance chaser. Where a peregrine falcon wants to get up and then dive and take out its prey. A Gyrfalcon, it'll go wherever, and it'll just chase, literally for miles, which is a terrible pain if you're trying to track down your bird. If you just flush up a pheasant and your bird decides to go a mile and you're like, you're trying to track down your bird, it's kind of a pain in the butt, especially if eagles get in the way. Eagles love to try to kill Gyrfalcons, both golden eagles and bald eagles both. And my favorite Gyrfalcon, Jadis, for whatever reason, bald eagles were always attracted to her. They'd always find her. And I remember one of them, this bald eagle was diving and was just coming in on her. Even though they're faster, depending on your angle and the angle of attack, you can have a problem. And so she dove into a neighborhood and, got into some trees and was hiding. And when I went down to track her, then she saw me. She took back off because the eagle had landed too in a tree nearby and couldn't see her. So she took off again, and got up and started dive bombing the eagle and attacked it and chased this bald eagle off. I was so proud of her. Didn't want her to do that because she could get hurt, but I was very proud of her. Gyr Falcons have kind of dusty, non-plasticky feathers, just like a Prairie Falcon. The texture of their feathers very similar, even though they're not closely related. You have kind of convergent evolution going on. Similar ways of life. Cold, dry areas. It's hot in the summer for a prairie, but in the winter it's cold, dry. Same thing where Gyr Falcon lives. So they have similar feathers due to a somewhat similar way of life. These species are both really cool, and both of these I only recommend flying them if you love the species, if you're passionate about the species. In America, do not think of a Prairie Falcon as a cheap, quick alternative to a Peregrine. Don't be like, well, hey, I could buy a captive bred Peregrine Falcon or put in for a drawing to do a wild take of a Peregrine Falcon, or I could just buy a capture room and go get a Prairie Falcon. That's not a good reason to get a Prairie Falcon. If you're really serious about this, save up and get a Peregrine Falcon. And then, again, unless you really want a Prairie Falcon. I have many friends who love Prairie Falcons as much as I love lanner falcons, and would even prefer a Prairie over a Peregrine for that reason, just because they love them. And same thing, for me, I love Gyr Falcons because they challenge me. Gyr Falcons are about as smart as an eagle. A proper Gyr Falcon. And that's my experience. I know some of you eagle flyers are going to disagree with me, but having flown a lot of eagles and having flown a lot of Gyr Falcons, there's a comparison there. There's a thought. And Gyr Falcons and golden eagles both, one thing I love about them is if a bird is afraid and it's on your fist, you're training a new bird, it'll bait away from you. It'll bait away. Gyr Falcons and golden eagles both, when they bait at you. They're trying to bait away, but they're like, I'm going to take this fool out while I'm taking off, and they lunge at you, and it's like, oh, there's some strength there. There's some confidence that you have in Gyr Falcons and in golden eagles that is surprisingly comparable. And again, I say this often because of dealing with the mentality. If you ever want a golden eagle, fly a Gyr Falcon. Even though the flight style is entirely different, working with them mentally and kind of addressing how they function, a golden eagle will help prepare you well for a golden eagle's mental thought processes. It's not about the size. It's not about the hunting style. I'm talking specifically, it's a good bird of prey for a golden eagle because you will understand their mentality better. So both of these birds, though, Gyr Falcons and Prairie Falcons, both of them can occur in my area in Utah. I've flown them both. I love them both. And again, the recommendation is don't fly one of these. If you have the choice to do a Peregrine over these two species if you have the choice, unless you're passionate about them. And if you're passionate about them, then have at them because they are both really rewarding. Again, if you get a Peregrine up and running, it's like, yeah, okay, you got them dialed in. But you get a Prairie Falcon dialed in for a Prairie Falcon or a Gyr Falcon, have them catching quarry from a dive. It's very rewarding, and it's falconry of the highest caliber. So, hope you enjoyed kind of this quick comparison between these two species. Again, look down below in the comments, in the description, and I will have a link to Steve Chindgren's video following some nesting Prairie Falcons through their whole nest cycle. It's really cool to see. He has amazing footage of these birds. And if you haven't already, if you could hit subscribe. If you have any questions or comments or want to collaborate, you can message me at benwoodruffalconry@gmail.com. And as always, happy hawking.